Okay, I'm a custom cabinet maker, and a couple of months ago, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I added these Harvey components to my saw stop. I got the Big Eye rip fence, and I got the Compass ST-1500 sliding table. I really love these components. They've helped my workflow quite a bit already, improved my accuracy, my speed, and my safety. I've enjoyed having them tremendously. And what I use the slider for primarily is cross-cutting sheet goods. It's good for other stuff as well, but for that, it's incredible. And so something that I've kind of learned about this is, when I've got to rip something, and I wasn't anticipating this, I guess I just didn't think it through much, but anytime you've got to rip something where it's going to be wider than this space here, right, and it's going to hit this, then your miter fence on this slider is going to be in the way, and it only comes back, that far. So if you got to rip something that's longer than that and wider, then this miter fence gets in the way, which to me happens all the time, especially with sheet goods, right? And so sometimes I can to move this fence, you can loosen this knob here. Press this button down. There's some detents in there. And once you press this down, then you can pivot the fence around, right? So the thing is, there's a little bit of play. There's a little bit of slop in this detent. And I find that one of the things that I think it could be, improved with engineering on this slider specifically is the quality of these detents. I don't really like that there's some wiggle in there, right? So what happens essentially is that once you've loosened this up, initially when you set this up, you've got these 4 hex bolts, and you get it squared up, then you lock those hex bolts down, tighten this down, and you're square, and they're like, now you're square. Well, you're not really square, because as soon as you loosen this knob and change the position of this fence, when you come back to this detent, it's not going to be square again until you re-square it up with the blade and lock this down, and then you're actually back square, right? Sorry, my video is all over the place. I'm not like a pro at this or anything, but so what I was doing was, anytime I'd have to remove this fence, you just loosen these 2 nuts here, or bolts. You can slide it out of that miter track and take it off. Or if you don't need a lot of clearance, maybe you can just press this and pivot it out of the way, and maybe get yourself just enough clearance when you don't have to do that. And so sometimes I do that, sometimes I take it all the way off. But then I'm like, as soon as I've taken it off, I'm not square anymore. So I've got this setup plate. I'll put on my arbor. It gives me a nice flat surface to reference against for squaring, where you don't have to dodge the teeth on the blade and everything. It's great, but you got to take your blade out, you got to put this plate in, then you got to do the whole squaring up process, and then switch back to your blade. It's the whole thing. And at first, when I was re-squaring it up, I was loosening these bolts, loosening this, getting it squared back up against my plate, then carefully tightening these, making sure it didn't shift it all on me the whole time, locking it. It was a whole thing. And I was like, dude, this kind of sucks, actually, that anytime I got to take this fence off, I got to go through this entire setup process to put it back on. And then something occurred to me, and I'm kind of a dum-dum for not realizing this earlier, but maybe you're also being the dum-dum like I was. When I set up my rip fence, and the process is actually pretty easy, I got this dialed in so good that I had 0 thousandths of an inch travel between when I'd move my gauge along the fence and the blade, right? Or the miter track to the blade, and then miter track to the fence, right? So I've got these perfect. And so it occurred to me that I could just square up against my rip fence. As soon as that occurred to me, it totally changed this process for me. Now, I've got this big 18-inch TSO triangle. I love this thing. I use this all the time. This was a great purchase. I highly recommend having one of these because you got such a big triangle. When I use this to square up, I don't even bother with the 5-cut method. I'm like, man, if I'm this close, I'm good enough, right? I'm not doing like, high engineering. If it's close enough with an 18-inch triangle, it's close enough for me, right? So once I figure that out, then you just lock the fence down. You can see here there's a little bit of a gap there. It's not quite square. That's easy enough just with some hand force on the fence. Once this is loose, you can get that nice and snug all the way down your rip fence, and then tighten this down, and then you're square. It's the fastest way to do this. And, you know, now I'm like, I don't even care if I got to take the miter fence off or something. No big deal. Take it off, put it back on, throw my triangle down, square it up, good to go. And so that's, for me, is the best way to resolve this. And then all of a sudden it turns something that for me was like a real frustration and annoyance into a non-issue, total non-issue. So I hope that helps. Otherwise, man, I really love this stuff. And my only suggestion to Harvey, make those detents better, guys. But other than that, man, good stuff, dude. Good stuff.